Welcome to Who Cares, the podcast that embarks on a profound journey into the heart of empathy and indifference in our modern era. Each episode of Who Cares brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests from various industries and walks of life. But Who Cares goes beyond individual stories. We dive into the larger societal and psychological undercurrents that have led to a perceived decline in collective empathy. Who Cares isn't just a podcast. It's a powerful call to action for reigniting the spirit of empathy within each of us. Let's find the answer to who cares together. Welcome to Who Cares. Today's episode features an extraordinary guest, Rosemarie Jensen, an educator, literacy advocate, and activist who has spent decades fighting for public education and student rights. Rosemarie has worked tirelessly to ensure that all children, regardless of background, have access to the education and support they need to thrive. Rosemarie's story is one of deeply caring, not just about her students, but about the larger systems that impact them. From her advocacy against high-stakes testing to her work with parents and educators fighting for better educational opportunities, Rosemarie exemplifies what it means to channel empathy into action. In this episode, we'll explore how Rosemarie has managed to maintain her commitment to care in a world that often seems indifferent, and what she sees as the key challenges to fostering empathy in our schools and communities. Rosemarie's dedication to literacy, education, and social justice is a shining example of the kind of empathy-driven leadership our world so desperately needs. Join us as we explore the complexities of compassion, education, and advocacy on Who Cares, where we seek to answer that essential question together. Hi. So honored to have you join us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I did have a chance to read your bio a little bit, which is awesome. And so I would really like for you to kind of maybe tell us more about that.
From where?
Maybe just your history, maybe an overview of the history of where you started.
So my history is probably in public education. I grew up in public schools in Florida. And my parents were, very involved in our schools and very much a part of, making sure that, my brother and I would go to college. This was, they did not. I'm kind of the first generation college goer on probably both sides of the family. And so my parents were very involved. My mom, did PTA and I think my first experience with like a feeling of community around public education was our school. They built a new school and they asked everybody to come out and lay sod. And so we did, the whole family, and you met everybody in the community. And so that was kind of my first experience. School was, public education was pivotal for me. I still believe high school was just pivotal for me, and I had a great experience. I did not think I was going to be a teacher. That was not how it started. But what ended up happening was I had come home to do I was a theater person in high school. So they reached out and said, we're going to do this theater camp, and we need someone to do the 5 and 7-year-olds. Would you like to do it? Okay. I didn't know what I was doing, but of course. So, jumped right in and we worked on a performance for 6 weeks, and we, did all these things. And at the end, the parents were coming to me and saying, what did you do? Because my kids are starting to read. Oh, wow. And I was like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what I did. I can tell you how we rehearsed and, how we did this, and it just kind of, and I was a voracious reader as a kid. Like I was reading Stephen King in 6th grade. I was reading, do you remember the books, The Patriots and that whole series? I can't even remember the author's name, but Taylor Caldwell. I was reading all these books, and the librarians knew me in Coral Springs. I was that kind of kid. So I was just really invested in how do kids learn to read? Like this just ignited this kind of like question in me. And I went, I think this is where I want to end up. So I got my degree. I went to I went to University of Florida. We had a phenomenal program. At the time, it was called Pro Teach, and it was a 5-year program. So you walked out with a master's. It was at a time when there was a real push to professionalize the education and treat teachers as professionals. And so it was about being reflective and doing research while you were a teacher. So asking essential questions and trying things in your classroom and then presenting research. So I had this incredible experience, learning from some amazing professors, and then I got to teach in Gainesville and teach at the lab school there. So I was surrounded by geeky educators like me who on Friday night happy hour were like, bring an article. We're going to discuss, this topic that's impacting education and, over wine and, nachos. There we are like arguing, well, why does that work or why shouldn't that work? And is that good for all kids? And, that kind of thing.
So really drumming up with the excitement.
Yeah. So that really, it was just a great experience. And so, I taught for about 10 years and I was involved in literacy education and math education and very focused on early childhood developmentally appropriate practice, Piaget, Vygotsky, Camus, all these, And then I had kids and I had Danielle, so I stepped out of teaching. I was still doing literacy workshops. But then what started happening in Florida was there was this shift to high stakes testing. Yeah. And immediately I was like, I had this like feeling like, and I could see how it started creeping into classrooms. And then my former colleagues, because I kind of at the time was very assertive, still very assertive, would tell me things that were happening. And of course they couldn't speak up. So there I was walking in front of school boards and SAC committees and saying, what are we doing? This isn't good for kids and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of became that girl. And that really kind of lit the fire for advocacy for public education because again, I could see how it was going to impact. Immediately, I knew it was going to impact kids who were in affluent schools or but I could see who was going to get damaged first. And it was very clear to me that there was something that needed to be done because, certain kids and certain teachers and certain schools were going to be impacted very negatively very quickly. So,
So what was the response of that? Were they responding to you in a positive way or what do you think was happening?
No, I think everybody, so many people were thinking that'll never happen here. It won't happen to my kids, that kind of thing. And for me, I had taught in, my first school that I taught in was in Alachua County. It was an 85-year-old elementary school. It was in a very, economically depressed area of the city. It was very diverse. We also were the ESOL center. So all the kids that came to Gainesville who spoke a second language, now you have professors' kids who, my first year teaching, I had 32 second graders, 7 of whom spoke no English. One who spoke Portuguese, one who spoke Korean, one who spoke only Hebrew. I mean, I had so many languages going on. And I had, kids who's, just, struggled for many reasons. But I taught in this amazing school with teachers who went to this school, who knew the families in the neighborhood. Yeah. And so here I was, this, I know everything, white girl coming into the school, and boy, I got an education. Really? And I learned to sit down and listen and to learn from people who had done this for a long time and who knew how to reach families and create communities in a school, especially this school where half the teachers knew this person's family and who was working when. And if I was having a struggle, I could go to certain teachers and go, I don't know. And they're like, oh, they started shift work last week. So this kind of thing is happening. Wow. So there was a lot of that. And so you learned really quickly to do things like open houses or your parent nights. You stay till 9, 10 o'clock so that parents could come in because they do want to come in. Right. They do. They love it. And I can't tell you, like, the experience for me and for, I think all teachers need to teach in those environments where you have to learn that, all parents, regardless of, their socioeconomic, they love their children and they just want what's best for them. And coming to school for many of them is very fraught with bad memories or bad experiences, so they're afraid to come to school. So I learned a lot. I learned to sit back and listen to these older, wiser teachers who, taught me about, and I could see teaching at this school, because I had done 4 placements, that this school was not so highly appointed as the school in the brand new, sections of Gainesville. And it really, really bothered me. I mean, I was really like, why these kids deserve all of those things, all the same things. Why aren't they equitably managed or funded? Or, we had teachers who were writing grants and, they were writing grants for Math Their Way materials to teach K-1s, how to, and they were going into the homes.
Yeah.
And training the parents. These are the games you can play with their children. This is, so I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about, that's my first, yes,
So teaching
things are not
career.
Equitable. Yeah.
It wasn't just a career. It was a lifestyle.
It was just, for me, my whole identity was wrapped up in education. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it kind of is now, not like it was, but but then it was, And then it, then when it becomes your own kids, you still have that, well, wait a minute. Now this is,
that drive. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where did that lead you at that point? I mean, you got a huge education yourself.
Yeah.
And I know you went to do even more advocacy after that.
Yeah. Well, what happened was the stuff that was happening in Florida with high stakes testing. So now the kids are everybody's so focused on this test that all the good stuff about education is getting pushed out.
Could you tell us more about what the high stakes testing included?
Okay, well, in Florida, it was called the FCAT to start. It's gone through so many iterations. I don't even know what it's called at this point. I think it's the FSA. But anyway, third grade, it was decided by Jeb Bush and, people that the National Reading Panel, people who were not educators, that somehow this was the pivotal year. And if they couldn't pass this particular test, they needed to be retained. So that backed up to now everybody was like, well, why aren't they reading here? Why aren't they reading here? Right. So now we're at a place now where we're expecting pre-K kids to come out of pre-K reading. And there's a lot of stress on these littles, where before, I mean, I was teaching kindergarten for a couple of years and we napped. And if they were reading I don't know, like simple Dr. Seuss books, you were like, wow, they're doing great, but now they want that and they want that in pre-K. So that's, so I saw that kind of getting pushed down back then. Like you could just see it was just going to get pushed down. And then the pressure became, well, your test scores now fund your schools. Well, very clearly. Yeah. Who's going to get the money and who's not? Right. Right? Okay. So that was just, I was just, I'm like, is anybody else seeing this? Is this just me? Like, what's happening? Then it became teacher pay. Was attached to the children. So now my kids are like responsible for these teachers' their bonuses, which is a whole nother ball of wax in the school to watch that whole discussion. But so that was happening at this time. And so it was just getting, and then they were taking things like, your kitchen's out of the kindergarten and you're not allowed to cook anymore and you're not allowed to do field trips, but maybe you used to do a field trip once a month. That was a thing. Yeah. Oh, no, we don't have time for that because we have these tests. So, so this was, leading up to, this was, now I'm getting into, this is when the Facebook started kind of like 2005. And now I'm finding Facebook groups of public educators like discussing this online and what can we do about this and how do we organize? And then my son hit the third grade retention because my son has a learning disability. And so we knew that going in, we knew what the issue was, and they did not give him his accommodations for the FCAT, which is a whole nother ball of wax. Yes. And here I am, like, this is me, and we're asking, and then the day of, they're like, he didn't get his accommodations. Like, what do you mean he didn't get his accommodations? So of course he's not going to pass because he needed more time. He doesn't pass, so they're going to retain him. Wow. And I, knowing that the research on retention and boys, I'm like, that will not happen. that we are not doing that.
Yeah.
And so now I'm thinking about all the kids. And I knew this, for all these other kids, who don't have parents who can afford tutors and support and blah, 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 and schools that don't have reading specialists because they don't have the funding because their test scores are bad, so they don't get, right? So that really just spurred me to just really reach out to people. And so I was speaking at school board meetings and it became a big network of people on Facebook from all across the country. And in 2012, there was a march on D.C. to support public education. There was and it was huge. I didn't want to go because I was terrified of leaving my children. I was awful. I wouldn't get on a plane. But this is the thing that got me on a plane.
Wow.
A woman in Jacksonville, Donna Mace Yates, who started Red for Ed.
Yes.
That was her thing. Said, come to D.C. I'm going to be there with the family. Come meet me there. And I was like, Rick, I said to my husband, I got to do this. Yeah. I have to go. So I went to this march by myself.
Wow.
My cousin did come meet me, but basically I was there, by myself, and I was meeting all these people that I had talked to online, just immerse myself with all these great educators, committed activists. And from there on in, I became part of a huge network of public ed activists. We were I was part of a group called United Opt-Out. And the goal was civil disobedience by not having our kids not take the test. Very hard for parents to do. Yeah. Very hard. Yeah. But we were like, stop the test. If you stop feeding the narrative, they'll have to do something else. So that was our push. And we literally grew into like 50 chapters across the country. Wow. And parents were doing it for a while. And we met every year. So that's kind of where it went. Yeah. I mean, and then it just became, I would say my best friends are from all over the country. Because these are the people I met, who were committed. We went up to D.C. It was called Occupy, because this was back in Occupy. It was Occupy the D.O.E. And, we met with Arnie Duncan and, we marched and we had speakers. And oh my gosh, the people I met up there. I mean, I'm peanuts. I mean, these were social justice warriors like Diane Ravitch came and spoke and Yahuwah Williams and Jamal Bowman. And you had, I can't think of Karen's last name. She was the head of the Chicago's Teachers Union, who was just oh my God, so knowledgeable and so good at organizing and teaching us how to organize and how to talk. Yeah. It's just amazing. And I had these Tim Slecker, who runs the podcast Busted Pencils. And he was one of the first professors who opted his kids out. And just Soresta Smith and there's just so many people that really, again, sit back. Yeah. And listen and learn from people who are really
life-changing.
Right. Yeah. And at the same time, like charter schools, which, we as a Floridian, because Jeb brought those in, I said right from the beginning, they were a Trojan horse. They were not going to be innovative. They were not going to be, this was, we're going to close public schools. And where do they close public schools? In the neighborhoods who need public schools the most, because they are cornerstones of communities. They are centers where people have memories and long memories. And, my husband is in Portland, where he grew up. Called me last night, and he hasn't been there, I think, since we were there, like 25, before Danielle was born, actually. And he's calling me, and he's like, I'm at my elementary school, and it's still here, and it looks exactly the same. And I'm at my middle school where I played soccer on the field the same. And these are the things that anchor communities. And it's not lost on me that the whole point of closing schools in neighborhoods that are, have economic blight or, are low socioeconomic ones is to destabilize those communities even more. Yes. Because now the kids are going in 4 different directions. Yes. No one has a community to rely on. Right. And it's terrible. It's criminal to me. Yeah. And I go back to, I remember seeing D.L. Hughley, who, I don't know if, comedian. He was on, I think it was Bill Maher, and he was talking about this. And his whole point was, why do we have to leave our neighborhoods to get something good?
Absolutely.
I will remember that
Yes,
statement, and I remember
yes.
thinking exactly why.
Yes.
If the one thing that these neighborhoods need is a public school with people in the community who have long-term roots, who know families. I mean,
It's the soul of the community.
it is the soul of the community,
Yeah,
you know, where
yeah.
you have weekend fairs or you
Yes,
have, you know,
yes.
math nights or reading nights. Those, you know, neighborhood, and it's a place where when you meet all the parents in the school, you create connections. So, hey, I'm running late for work. Can you pick my kid up? Or,
Right,
you know what I mean?
right.
Like
You get
those
to
are
know
the
each
things.
other,
Yeah.
right. It brings people together.
Right. So
Yeah.
now kids are going to this charter school and this, that, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah. And
yeah.
those charter schools
Yeah.
are
Being
fly by
bussed.
night.
Yep.
They're there for 2 years and then they're gone.
They're gone.
Because it's really a real estate grab.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah.
I always said you should have choice within your public school in your neighborhood, choice of teacher,
Yeah.
maybe choice of curriculum. We tried that in a school where we had different teachers who, you know, we had tracks and people could, you know, we want this teacher. And I'm like, that I think is, you know, but come to your public elementary school.
Yeah.
Come get
Yeah.
involved. I mean,
Yeah.
come, you know, make this, you know, because Rick said to me last night when we lived in Florida, I used to go by my schools once a week.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
still there and they were,
Yeah.
you know, and,
Yeah.
and that's, you know, in fact, my high school is having their 50th anniversary of being opened. So
Wow.
they're inviting everybody to come back.
Yeah.
And those are things that are really important in
Yeah,
communities.
absolutely.
They're anchors, they're
Absolutely.
cornerstones. And
Yeah.
our grandparents fought for public schools.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And we're just they're just being
They're
defunded.
falling apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
planned.
Yeah.
It's on purpose, and
Yeah.
it has been. And so that's kind of why I've been so involved.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned growing up in a family that encouraged discussion about civil rights and social justice. How do you think those early conversations still influence the way you approach advocacy today?
I think about that a lot because my parents grew up in Buffalo, New York.
Oh, wow.
And their families are not very accepting. They're not. They weren't, I should say. You know, I had a grandfather who used to say things to me like, "Why do you need education? You just need to be pretty." Those kinds of things.
Yes.
You know, very
generational.
Yeah, very generational. My dad, you know, my dad was a smart man, but he just, you know, he lived in a house with no running water.
Yeah.
He was dirt poor.
Oh, wow.
So he escaped by he volunteered to be in Vietnam. He signed up at 17 and
Wow.
yeah. But always my dad read the paper front to back every day to the day he passed away. And you know, growing up we had National Geographic, Newsweek. I started reading Newsweek probably when I was 10.
Oh, my goodness.
Cover to cover, you know,
Wow.
and National Geographic came every month. I read that cover to cover.
Yeah.
My mom was an avid reader. She read to us, like The Little Prince was my first book that I still have and I remember. You know, my mom read to me all the time. And then, so my parents were very, you know, very welcoming. My dad would say very offensive things, but his behavior was completely opposite.
Really?
Yeah. He would use the lingo that he grew up hearing.
Yeah.
But that's not how he treated people. He was very, you know, we had lots of different people in our house. I tell the story that my dad came back from Vietnam and all the kids in the neighborhood, they were all college students. So they were the same age, but now my parents are parents. They have me, they have my brother, but they were like the hangout. So I grew up with all these college boys in the house. One was actually a psychologist and who I apparently like did a lot of stuff with me, like took tests with me and read with me and did all kinds of like, was just enamored, you know. So these were all different kinds of boys. They were, you know, and so, you know, my parents were very much into music. So we, you know, they would go see live music and became friends with, you know, these different bands and they would come over and, you know,
wow.
so we had lots of different people and my dad was very accepting. My mom, when we moved to Florida, you my mom was very accepting. I tell the story that my mom, I was, of course, in theater in high school. And of course, at that time, people were not out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of my friends were, when you look back, you're like, yeah, they were definitely, part of the LGBT community.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my other friends were not very nice. And I'll never forget my mom chasing two people out of the house who were being completely homophobic and saying terrible things in my house. And my mom just lost her mind. And she was like, you get out of my house. This is not how everybody's accepted here. And so I saw that. And I do remember, I do remember an argument one time between my mom and her sister. And it was about garbage men. I'll never forget this story. And my aunt, she was saying, why should they get paid better than teachers? Because she was a teacher at the time. And believe me, I mean, their salary was terrible, but in Florida. But my mom was saying, what do you mean? They do an essential service that we all need. Why shouldn't they? Right. We need them. And my aunt was like, but they don't have an education. My mom was crying. How do you say that about people? They work so hard. They're doing manual labor. I remember that argument very clearly.
So that was very personal in your family.
It was, I saw a lot of that. And then my cousins would visit from up north and some things were said and I'd be like, I'm not really cool with that. Yeah. It's not really cool. Yeah. Not cool.
So, but it was spoken. It was outright spoken. So you learned from an early age
it was outright
to
spoken.
Speak it.
Oh, yeah. And we did things like my Nana lived with us for a while. From the time I was little, she would always... And again, my dad and my Nana and my had grew up with, no water in their house. Very like minimalist people. But, my Nana's thing was every 6 months, you go through your house and whatever you don't use, you take, we would take it to the Indian reservation in New York. When we moved to Florida, we had, at the time there was farms, migrant farms. Yeah. And so we would drive down and we would take all our clothes to the migrant farms to people who had, and we didn't have a lot. We were not, we were, my parents struggled. My dad struggled. My dad, so. Yeah. We lived on the largest, we lived in a duplex my grandparents bought and we lived on one side and they lived on the other. And so it was, it's a whole nother story. But anyway, so we were always, my parents were always thinking about other people. My grandmother taught me to think about other people. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you think has been the most difficult moment in your activism journey? How did you stay connected to your sense of purpose with fighting against the high stakes testing or, and things might have felt overwhelming in those situations?
I think there are moments when it gets that way where you're like, why can't I be the person who doesn't care? And there are moments where, believe me, I'm like, why can't I be ignorance is bliss and not really pay attention, right? Yeah. Because it keeps getting worse. Now we have vouchers that are taking so much money from schools. And they're, the research suggests, as we said, that was really just going to support wealthy peoples who already choose private schools. They can afford it already, but now they're taking a big chunk of this money. And it just takes it right out of our public schools, I have this great support system. I have friends all over the country, and we are connected. I know it's lame on Facebook, but we also have text groups that I talk to these people every day. So when there's times when you feel like it's just insurmountable, they're like, have those days, wallow a little bit, scream and yell, and then live to fight another day.
People that get you, right?
Right. So, my last big thing was right before the pandemic. God, I had such big plans. But it was January in Florida, and teachers had a humongous march in Tallahassee. So got on a plane, met all my Florida people, and we, marched on the Capitol, and we had speakers from, all over the country that came in. Jesse Sharkey, I want to say he was Chicago Teachers Union. I can't remember. I think so at that time. Donna was there and everybody was there, all my Florida people, because I'm still very much involved in Florida.
Okay.
quietly. I do think I'm in a group. And so, I'm kind of part of a lot of people who are still very active.
Yeah.
I still run some groups there to help parents figure out how to opt out of testing.
Oh, wonderful.
So we still kind of help parents do that. We still have that network in Florida. And then we also have like, just other actions we take, supporting certain school board members or getting the information out about that kind of stuff. So, but that was my last, I was like, okay, Connor was at school and, and now I'm going to be flying all over helping. And, didn't happen, but it was a great last hurrah. We definitely, it didn't help, because you march on these governors and they double down and go, okay, we're going to show you. But you just...
Yeah.
You just feel like the pendulum will swing eventually. People do come back to the public schools, and
Is
they
that
do.
how you feel? Do you keep your hope alive?
That's level? On some level I do. I feel like, people, I was talking to someone yesterday about this. They were like, what do you think? Why do you think there's such a, lately there's so many people who just, trash public education or trash teachers. And I said, well, I can actually pinpoint it. I think this is my own opinion, but this is what I say. Sandy Hook happened.
Yes.
And when Sandy Hook happened, all of a sudden we had to lock down all our schools.
Yes.
Okay. So when I was teaching K-1, my parents walked their kids to the door every day. You love that.
Yeah.
You love when they walk to the door.
Yeah.
Not every day, but you know, if they could be there, they would walk your kid to the door. So you got to know the moms and the dads, and you got to meet the little siblings that you would eventually have. Right. Those kinds of things. And you develop this kind of camaraderie. So when there was an issue and you called, they weren't like, right away, not even surprised, but they didn't have their back up and go, doing the mom, the whole not my kid thing. They were like, they knew me really well. They knew my, philosophy or whatever. So we had that kind of community going. Yeah. And I think when we locked the gates, now we don't let parents in unless they go through the medical detectors or whatever, you lose that sense of we're in this together. This is a community. That kind of thing.
Well, school became about fear.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really changed. We did things at the lab school I learned, and then I brought it to Broward County where, there's so much unpaid labor in education for teachers. But I would have like a picnic in the park, like probably in the first month of school. Like everybody's going to bring a potluck, bring the whole family. Yeah. Let's get to meet all the kids in the class for play dates, just to know each other. And it was great. I would go, I get to meet all the kids, in a very relaxed environment. Yes. I didn't have to discipline them or anything like that. I would just enjoy them as the kids that they were. And it really developed a sense of community. I don't know that you could even do that now. I don't know if the liability on that. I just did it. Yeah. But that I think is kind of lost. And I think in society, because these silos keep getting bigger and bigger because of the safety issue. Right. And that I think is something we need to think about as schools and as a society. What kind of society do we want? Like, what do we want to have empathy and connections with our teachers, Right. And I think teachers are, again, there's some that are... Again, right now they say there's a teacher shortage. There's a teacher shortage. We're out here. Yeah. We're out here. Yeah. We're just not going to teach in this environment. Right. We're just not. I'm not. I'm not going to go into a kindergarten, first grade class and ask these littles to do things that are not appropriate for them because they're stressed. Absolutely. They don't want to read. They don't want to try. Yeah. They're like, because they're under the gun to perform. And it's forced. Not right. Play is the business of children, and we're not allowing them to do that. Like, someone yesterday said, oh, we shouldn't be doing choice centers. I was having a discussion. I'm like, what do you mean you're not having choice centers? When you allow kids to make choices, it's autonomy. They're learning autonomy. Yes. They're learning to make decisions. And you're supposed to walk around and start putting out the little forest fires when they're having conflicts and teach them how to, these kids don't know how to manage conflict because we don't give them opportunities to have conflict, and that's what a lot of kindergarten and first grade was for me. I had to go in and go, well, wait a minute, how do we get along together? How do we, So I think there's a lot of things that, again, if you ask real teachers, to solve these problems and not politicians and the latest, journalist who thinks they know everything about education and has a great program to sell.
Right.
We could get back to, and I have hope that will happen. I don't know that it ever will, but I'd like to believe it will.
Are you seeing that? Are you seeing the effects of that now in this generation?
I wouldn't know. I can't speak to that because I'm not teaching, but that's what I'm reading. Yeah. The teachers are saying these kids just don't know how to self-regulate. Yeah. They don't know how to, manage, again, friendships and a lot of it is the phone.
I was going to say with the phone, technology, social media. Yeah. It takes away from community,
absolutely.
I think. And so that, it's double the issue, right?
Well, it's so funny you said that because I just called into NPR because they're talking about, taking the phones away, which I believe the phone should be in a backpack all day long. Yeah. To take it away, I don't agree with. Yeah. Only because I don't know how much, about my son. He survived the shooting in Parkland.
Oh, I didn't know
and that phone
was your lifeline. Yeah.
So I called into NPR because they were like, oh, a phone should never be at school. I'm like, no. In this society, in the way things are, that phone should be in a backpack away. I agree. Yeah. They should be not taken out all day long. But if God forbid.
So, wow, you can really, with that experience, you can speak from both sides of that.
I can. That's why I called in and said I can speak from both sides. So as a teacher, I would hate them. I know I would. But I would also not, I would say, I'm going to take your phone if you have it out when you're not supposed to. Yeah. Because the kids do need to talk. Like, they should not have their phones at lunch. They should be sitting across the table talking to each other. Yeah. Absolutely. But they need to have that phone. I mean, I can't even think like when they were in high school, like Danielle and my son Connor, like, this rehearsal's running late, or oh my God, I forgot this costume, or can you bring this? I mean, they needed that phone. So, and there was times I needed to text them something, and someone said, well, why would you text them in the middle of the day? I'm like, well, I don't expect them to look at it in the middle of the day, but when they open their phone at the end of the day, I want that message there because I don't want them to get on a bus or get in a car.
Right, I'm going to be late.
Right, Right. So, the phone is definitely you're right. It's another layer. That's, really taking the kids' ability to, I mean, I say to, my kids, I'm like, I would not, if I had you now, you would not have an electronic in your hand until you were, 7 or 8. Yeah. I'm not even an iPad. I see, the plug. I mean, I just think of like just conversations that we would have at restaurants when they were little. Right. Because you have to keep them busy. Well, that's, so they learned how to behave and they learned how to talk. Right. And we counted forks and we sorted sugar packs and the colors and we did all these things. Right. But, that's how kids learn.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. So I think I think teachers are seeing, I mean, I see it on TikTok and all these teachers, saying they're just having lots of behavior issues. Yeah. And on top of that, because there's no time for social learning, because you have a lot of parent groups who don't believe social emotional learning should be done in schools. Yeah, that's another wild push right now. Right. Banning certain books that talk about those issues. Oh, my goodness. Really robs kids of the ability to have empathy for other people and to have, So, which I didn't have. I mean, I have way too much children's lit, but every time I could find a book that represented somebody that was new, I mean, now it's great. The breadth of diversity in children's lit is amazing. I mean, that just wasn't there when, we were really struggling back in the 90s. But these, and families have changed so much. Yeah. And kids should learn about other families. Yeah, but there's a whole faction of parents who don't agree with that. Mm-hmm. So those books get banned and they don't want teachers talking about empathy and compassion and there's a whole nother layer.
You don't want them to feel at school.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes you will feel bad. That's what books do. You feel bad, you feel good, you learn to step into someone else's shoes. the whole point of children's lit, and and there's so many good books right now.
I was going to ask you, do you have a book that is a favorite that you used to read to your kids?
Oh my God. My personal kids or my classroom kids?
Well, both.
My God, there's so many. My first book is called Amazing Grace. I think of that book all the time. I love that book to read to my kids. I was more into authors, so Mem Fox was one of my favorites. Jamie Lee Curtis has some really amazing books.
Yes.
Amazing books.
Yes.
I used to read those to my kids when they were little. I know I'm forgetting a million of them, but I have a lot of nighttime books, time for bed, or books about, Living to the Moon and Back, those kinds of books, So, I mean, I couldn't even tell you because it is outrageous how many children's picture books I have. And in fact, I pared it down in half when we moved here from Florida. And then we got here and I was told to pare it down again. So I probably have like 1,000 of my very favorites.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. But there's so many great books out there.
Yeah.
And, I couldn't even come up with, Amazing Grace was probably one of my favorites. Time for Bed by Mem Fox was probably another one. Those kinds of books are,
that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, when I was in Gainesville, I was part of a movement where we brought authors in. So I had a lot of famous children's authors. Ted Arnold, who's so funny and so good.
Fun.
Paper Bag Princess is probably one of my favorite books.
Fun.
That Robert Munch, probably one of my favorites. We had so many people. We had Patricia McKissick, who wrote beautiful folk books about Black children, like these great folk stories. We had the Dillons come in who write stories about African fairy tales and folk tales that are fantastic because you can compare those with American ones with your first graders so they can see the parallels.
How awesome.
And we had, trying to think, Dawn and Audrey Wood, who is another, King Biggood's in the Bathtub, another one of my favorite. So I was part of a movement to bring authors in to really talk to children. I worked with the librarian at the lab school was phenomenal. She brought amazing people in. And then when I came to Broward County, we tried to do the same thing. We brought these authors in, and so the kids could really see what an author does and ask them questions.
Yeah.
Oh, that has gone away.
See, and that's the magical part of learning,
isn't
it?
It is.
Those are the things as I get older, I remember, those are the only things I remember about school.
It is. It is really good. It is.
Because they make an impression.
Right.
And if you don't make an impression on kids, there's no education that happens.
Absolutely.
So, tests don't make an impression other than bad.
That is not what they remember about school, but that's all
right.
they're focused on. These kids are plug and play into these assessments every, once a week now.
Right.
It's taken up so much of learning.
It's a shame.
It's a shame. Yeah, it is.
Well, I in reading your bio, I like to have some fun.
Yeah.
I know you're a huge fan of Halloween and Christmas.
I am.
And decorating.
Oh yeah.
I have to know what is the most over the top thing you've done for the holidays?
Most over the top thing we've done for the holidays. Well, for 10 years, we would have a gingerbread building party for families. So we would invite anywhere from 10 to 15 families.
Wow.
And we had huge tables and we would line them with different candies and we would hand everybody a gingerbread house and hope to God that they could put it together and walk home with a gingerbread house, and we would have food and that kind of stuff. So that I would think that was probably back in the day was probably the most over the top thing. But we decorate. I have 7 trees.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it's a big production, and
how fun.
My kids like 5 years ago used to say to me, "We don't want any of this stuff." I'm like, and now they're kind of like, maybe I'll take some of the stuff because we have a Disney tree and we have.
Oh, how fun!
Our family tree is a tree that my husband and I started years ago. Where every year we think of something, we give each other an ornament that's representative of something that happened in our lives that was really
Yeah.
important, and it's got to be somewhat handmade. So they have gotten, and then the kids came along and we did it for them, and so now we have this tree with like a million ornaments.
Oh, that's really
I have
nice.
a cat tree, I have a teacher tree, I have a gator tree. Yeah, we have I have a outdoor woodland tree. Yeah, so it's a little it's a little over the top.
Yeah,
I'm a little
That's awesome.
I'm a little embarrassed about that sometimes when people see all the buckets come out, but it brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah,
so yeah.
Well, that's the important part, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well,
And good memories for my kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Kind of creating that foundation
Right.
for and tradition, I think, is so
And
important.
community. We
And
were trying
Yes.
to create community with other
Yeah.
families, and
Yeah.
that was the whole point of that.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, I appreciate everything you
Sure.
shared with us today, and
Sure.
I'm so excited to hear it all. And
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, what a great
And indulging me
story
to
Yes.
talk about something that's really
Yeah.
important to
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah.
thank you.
I think it should be important to all of us,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I try.
Terrific. Yes.
You just keep trying every day.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.